utilizing children's books to debunk option myths and address the love and loss associated with family transition. Anna Marie, how you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, this is going to be great. That's a mouthful of a subject, but it all is really, it feels like important, to kind of go through. Um, one of the things when I was going through, your stuff, you talked about the myth of adoption. And so let's kind of talk about what you mean by that and how your that understanding came about for your family.
Well, your listeners probably are very familiar with that. The myth of adoption is perpetuated by really the world of entertainment, movies and books and such, where adoption is seen as the solution to an orphan's dreams, and that all of the problems and everything about the situation is solved by the adoption, when in fact the trauma of adoption is never really presented accurately in the world of entertainment or literature.
You had this issue, didn't you? I mean, this was something that you lived through and kind of came to a head to encourage you to write. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, I am an adoptive mom, and our journey started with infertility, really. But after treatment and such, we had a beautiful baby girl, but then adding to our family proved impossible. So we set out on the road of adoption. And it took a long time. I won't go through all of the details, but it took a long time. We ended up adopting just a wonderful young girl, a child from Mexico at almost 7 years old. And so here, we had been working with the agency and in Mexico and in our hometown had assured us that these children, they want a family, they want to belong to a mom and a dad. Excuse me. But her behavior, and once we adopted her, all of that told us a different story. And it really, I mean, she cried actually for months when she realized she would be living with our family. And at the time, I was a full subscriber to the myth of adoption and was
Yeah.
wondering what's wrong here, what's happening. And it took me so long really to appreciate all that she had lost. I mean, obviously gaining a family, but her culture, the food, the taste, the smells, the caregiver, just a whole way of life was gone forever. And I wanted to focus on that as I finished my corporate career and began writing. I had kept journals and notes and such, and I thought really my message to adoptive parents is really to recognize this trauma, this grief that children go through, and that's a way to make your family really thrive.
I think I heard you use the term, and I if I get this right, the primal wound. And that was, can you talk about kind of what that is and what it brings about?
Well, that was part of my research when I began studying the whole concept of trauma associated with adoption. I came across the book, The Primal Wound by Nancy Verrier. And the primal wound talks about every adoption begins with trauma. So the act of separating from the birth mother in
Yeah.
and of itself is an act of trauma for that child. And whether that's recognized at whether the adoption happens as infants or even later, that trauma is present. Sometimes it doesn't always manifest itself until later in life, but it is there. And so in our family, our daughter had experienced significant trauma two times over, first being relinquished. There's such a thing called relinquishment trauma. And then, going to sleep in Mexico in one day, and then the next day being in suburban Philadelphia. So that's such a change. And, she was understandably just very upset. So the more I understood about this concept, the more I understood that it was the trauma really talking to me. And it's so important for parents to understand that and acknowledge it and not be afraid of those discussions with children.
In your case, and I don't know the lesser to extent, but you said had trouble talking to you. But she also had, it sounds like, I mean, would there have been language barriers even?
Yes. Oh, well, kids are so resilient. She did unfortunately lose her Spanish within a few months. And that in and of itself, of course, was trauma. And thus began the process of her trying to reclaim that for
Oh my
many
God.
years. So we started and stopped a number of times with tutors and wanted to support her in getting her language back. But it wasn't until she had sort of consistent lesson plans in middle school with Spanish that, it came back to her. Her accent reappeared, sounding beautifully, and she really um, just wonderfully became fluent within a matter of years, and by college was doing a study abroad program in Spain and in Mexico, and that was really, I think, a wonderful boost to
Just
her
kind
identity. Yeah.
of getting her lost back a little
Yes.
bit. So what can parents do? What can you know, can you through your experience, tell parents about, some ways to deal with that trauma?
Yes. Well, we're talking about such a significant issue here, but I want to be clear about kind of the unique perspective of my books, because your
Yeah.
child, of course, is not going to say to you, I'm traumatized. I want to. So my thought was, and again, the unique thing I do in my books is raise these trigger elements for parents to initiate the conversation, for children to recognize that these behaviors are normal and wonderful, and they should have thought-provoking discussions. But it's important to know what the signs are. For instance, in my book, How I Wonder Where You Are, I'm writing about a girl adopted from Colombia, not about all the uh, um, incidents in my books, of course, are inspired by our family, but they're not totally about our family, because my daughters would kill me if I wrote any more about them. So there's a young girl, Carla, adopted from Colombia, and she also has a sister, but the sister is biological within the family, but she's lost. She's wondering, who do I look like? What is my story? Where did I come from? What does my mother think about me on my birthday? And so these are the thoughts of adopted children that are very natural, very predictable, very and should be encouraged. And the the mission of my books is really to encourage this conversation, so that children know their story, their creation story, their birth story, uh, just as a biological child knows his or her story. So the concept of adoption, the story should be presented to children even before the concept of adoption is fully understood. And so that's the jumping off point, the starting point, the safe space for conversation, the prompts can be with my books.
You talk also about, the importance of family conversations just around this. And a lot of people are not comfortable with that. And what should we talk about?
Well, merely asking the question, because with an adoption, there is the existence of a birth mom or a first mom. I'm not sure whatever the family chooses to call the birth mother, and some of the adoption arrangements are open. So in many families, the birth mom, there is contact with the birth mom. But what I'm emphasizing in my books is that this link, this biological link, the child's first creation story or first story, should really not be something that the family shies away from. And just by raising the issue and leaving, kind of creating that safe space for the children to express their thoughts or things they've been thinking about. And honestly, some of these things are apparent through their behavior anyway. I mean, trauma is exhibited, tantrums, not telling the truth, disassociation with the family. There are there are clues to the family that something is amiss. And again, I think that the more directly these things are addressed, the better it will be for family health.
That makes sense. I mean, the creation in sort of the old school adoptions is the adoption. It's like, they'll, I'm happy to talk to you about, why we adopted you and how we got to adopt you. But that's like not the start of their existence.
Exactly, exactly. Yes. And the child has a right to think about that, to be curious about that, to ask questions about that. And that's what I'm trying to sort of normalize with my books, that these things are a part of a child's development that's very necessary and helps with that backstory. You're not dismissing the trauma or minimizing it, but just acknowledging it as a way to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and supporting the kid. I mean, I like how you allow the kid to sort of drive the story.
If the parents will allow that, because that's really where the key is. Notice, be aware of your child's behavior, perhaps things that are not said, but just that you feel is amiss, or be aware of the triggers. For twice in my daughter's academic life, she was asked to put together a family tree. And the first time was just a few weeks after she began, living with us and starting school. So that's part of one of my books also, the trigger of a family tree, of birthdays, so to know that these events uh, will possibly lead to questions from your child, and that it's natural and um, really a great thing to deal with in that moment, that will help prepare for future conversations, or um, a less a calmer existence.
Yeah. It's just I call it strategy, I guess, that parents can adopt. Is that good also for like young kids that are adopted, at birth or whatever? I mean, eventually it seems like those same questions may not come up as soon as your kids did or child's did, but they're going to come up eventually.
Exactly. Yes, and you raise such an important point, because I've read stories of adoptees who have said, I was fine for 30 some years, and then I discovered a letter from my adoptive from my biological mother, or I did 23andMe, the DNA testing, and found family links. So these are issues that can be addressed at any point, but I think the earlier that they're addressed, it just paves the way
Yeah.
for a greater understanding and identity, confidence, and identity of self, and confidence moving forward into adolescence and adulthood.
Knowing myself, can parents go overboard? Like forcing that situation, forcing their kid to talk about it, maybe when they're not quite ready to or want to.
I think by, again, going back to what I had said earlier about being open about the child's adoption story, even before the concept of adoption is understood, creates a foundation for children to ask questions. I think for me, taking cues and being observant about the child's behavior, I think will guide parents' decisions around this. But it's sometimes they need to be looked for, or and my books present the opportunity to at least
Right.
present the opportunity for questions to be answered.
Yeah, and I wanted to get to that. Your the vehicle you use to tell these stories and to bring this whole subject out are children's books. And it seems to me they may be uniquely good for this kind of a situation. Can you kind of talk about maybe why you did a children's book rather than just, a
Telling, yeah.
yeah,
Well, for me, it was all about, I'll also use the word normalize, normalizing this behavior for families. I can't say for children and for adults, but for both of them together, because once I realized how prevalent some of these situations were, I was so excited to write the books. And I'll give you an example, and that is, not one that is a happy incident, but my daughter saying, "I hate you. You're not my real mother. You're not. I don't want to talk to you," and just having these tantrums. So once I began to, research a little bit more about trauma and primal wound and what that meant for families, and then of course one of my top pieces of advice for adoptive families is to, have that network of support from other families. And so many of us were hearing the same things, and that was so typical. I was just so glad to include that in the book and provide maybe a bit of comfort to parents that this is quite normal for children to be asking these questions, to be exhibiting grief. And it's up to parents to be prepared. And again, that's what the books are all about, so that both sides, allow for a little bit of grace there, and
yeah.
have that conversation.
It's got to be tough when the word real comes out. That I mean that when you said that, I was like to myself, oh my gosh, I mean, how would you even, start to answer that? What is real? I mean, that's a tough word to get around.
And the fact that I wanted to put those comments in the book so that parents could, adoptive parents would be, I don't know, prepared, normalized, and be able to discuss it without being so offended, and thinking,
Yeah,
I'm the real parent. I'm real now. I'm the one that took responsibility. Adoptive parents shouldn't be so quick to, pat themselves on the back, because
yeah,
it is the burden is really on them to, again, acknowledge this trauma, recognize the role of the birth family, and just be honest about it. And that just paves the way for better understanding. So it was my mission to really put some of these uncomfortable phrases, situations in my books, so that families could deal with them and benefit from them.
the the on the other kind of flip side of that, they're also for children, obviously. And you need to, or I'm not saying you need to, it sound you had to also use words for them that they can understand. And how do you go about figuring out what's, which book is like I should say this and which I should say that? Do you are they like age specific kind of books, or is they grow kind of books?
Well, the three picture books are, I'll say, really appropriate for ages 4 to 8-ish, but the topics are such that I think they can be discussed well into adolescence. And maybe that's the trick, that this is really a baby book, but it brings up a couple topics I think we should discuss. And again, they're good conversation starters. The first one focuses a little bit on the concept of an international adoption and the cultural just the cultural changes that the child experiences in a whole new world. That's many people to love, and that's the trigger event for that was the family tree. So putting that together for families just to be honest and open about who's in the family and the fact that it takes time to get to know everyone. And then How I Wonder Where You Are was the book about the child wondering about her birth mom, and does she
Yeah.
think of me? And then the last one was Is Carla the Conqueror, which kind of mirrors my daughter's challenge in reading aloud when English was not her first language. So that was a tremendous hurdle that fortunately was understood, not understood. There were some things happening in her classroom. She, with not really a strong command of the English language, she was asked to read a story to the class, and she was so frightened she had crawled underneath the teacher's desk, and unfortunately did receive detention for that. So I was a little bit. That was my attempt at I'm hoping teachers are a little bit more understanding and kind of work with students. She had a tremendous connection with the English as a second language teacher, and gradually her proficiency in English and Spanish was fantastic. So,
Yeah. Wow. So what advice do you have for parents or people here thinking about adoption to, they're maybe going through it, but they're not yet like the adopters. What advice do you have for like prospective adoptive parents?
well, here I usually say three things. And the first is develop a network, talk to other families that have adopted. Just get them to tell you their story, how it came about, what decision did they make, international adoption versus domestic. The international numbers have really fallen off in recent years due to a number of situations. The second thing is, do your research. Just really read about things like the primal wound and the trauma and grief. It's often called disenfranchised grief that um, that children go through, and just make sure that you're once the adoption happens, make sure you're open and honest and forthright and telling the story as much as possible.
Oh, I love that idea. It's like breaking the myth, but not making, oh, you're replacing it with something. You're replacing it with well, the myth is this, but it's not that, but it's not bad. I mean, there's great things, there's good things. And so that myth may be gone, but the new reality is actually better.
Well, and also we did seek the help of professionals at various times. And those professional changed as our daughter grew. Her problems were, her thoughts were different at age 7 and age 13, 14. So we had a number of times that short periods of time where we would see a therapist to help us over, family hurdles. And I always wanted to provide a space for my daughter to talk to someone that was not me or not my husband. And we don't have to have all the answers. And sometimes your child will develop that special bond with someone else. As again, this ESL teacher was really crucial and did get her through school. So that happened because parents can't just be on the hook for every lesson.
Yeah.
So
No,
that's important.
it takes a village. It's true. Unfortunately, we've just like zapped ourselves out of time. But before we go, two things. One, sometimes I ramble and I don't ask the question that I should have asked. So is there something that you were like itching to say that I did not get to?
Well, no, just that for any listeners that are considering this journey, there's lots of scary material out there, and just it is a big task, and I think that the opportunities that I mentioned for further research and networking and discussing, just it's a very big decision, and just being prepared is really the best that you can do.
And that exactly leads to your books and how can people who want to read them or contact you go about doing so?
That would be great. Yes, my website has all of the information for a book purchase and other articles that I've written. It's amdidio.com. That's amdidio.com. And there are, again, my articles. I write in Medium, my links to the books, and some recipes that when all else fails, I did make food with the girls to kind of divert and distract. That always helps. And just be creative with your solutions with your kids.
Yeah, there's I love that thing with food. I mean, there's solutions where you don't think that those are solutions, but they are. I love that. Now, unfortunately, we are out of time. So, Anna Marie, thank you so much for being here today, talking about utilizing children's books to debunk adoption myths, but then to address all of the love and the loss that are associated with adoptions. And really any family transitions that it works out. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it was great. Everyone else, thank you for joining us. And if anyone has any further questions on today's topic, you can contact Anna Marie, or you could even post it here and we will get you contacted with Anna Marie. So until next time, stay safe, stay happy, and be well.